Good morning, Metalheads here, and welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown, and today we're looking at the latest album from Jinjer, entitled Macro. So, true story here, the first time I heard Jinjer, I was at the Queen Street Warehouse, and I'd had a couple drinks, and a buddy was talking about him, and I thought he was talking about, like, ginger, like pickled ginger, or like ginger root or candied ginger. And as a result, I did somewhat initially dismiss them because I thought that was just a really stupid name for a band. But that was a couple years ago, and since then a lot has changed for the band. In fact, through the last year and a half, their fame and popularity have skyrocketed, or at least I've noticed that it has. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure they had their fans beforehand, but I feel like within the last year and a half, every major metal publication has just been gushing consistently over Jinjer. Now, I did listen to the EP Micro, which came out earlier this year. I believe it was January, February, but I don't really remember much about it. It never really stuck with me, so I never really thought much of the band and was never really curious to check out their other works. After Macro, though, I'm willing to change that. Macro is a very interesting release, a blend of spices and ideas from across the entire heavy metal spectrum combined pretty successfully into a fluid, vicious, surprisingly somewhat intelligent blend of progressive groove metal. It does stumble a little bit here and there in its quest to incorporate as many different ideas as possible into one record, but there's no denying that there's a lot of ambition and talent put into this record, especially not when we're talking about lead singer Tatiana. She is almost consistently the best part of every single song she's on. Her gutturals are fierce, crackled, dry, in your face, full of so much character and energy. Her cleans, while not always meshing the best with the music, are very confident as well. A lot of great hooks and melodies on here. And while I don't know the full story, nor do I frankly have the time to do the research, I do know that Tatiana is a Ukrainian refugee and that heavy metal has been her escape consistently for the last decade. That is all felt, that is all evident. Those experiences have clearly inspired her monstrous performance. She sounds totally fucking enraged and in control throughout the entirety of this record, and she is incredible. For the love of God, listen to this record even if you just listen to it for her. She's killer. She is frankly the star of this record, and to some extent, Jinjer the band are aware of it. I mean, they don't really ever try and step on her toes, but they also don't step back. In fact, they're not far below Tatiana as far as enthusiasm and energy is concerned. There's a lot of different sounds and ideas on display with Macro, but consistently at the core of every song is a solid fusion of the raucous piss and vinegar metal of Lamb of God and the more intelligent, groove-laden death of Meshuggah. Tracks like On the Top, Retrospection, Pausing Death filled to the brim with earth-shattering fucking grooves. I was banging my head like a motherfucker to these songs and many more. These tracks also do a really good job at creating some emotional contrast for Tatiana with some powerful hooks and some brief, quiet, sparse moments of guitars and keyboards to create something a little bit more ambient, introspective, ethereal. Retrospection in particular wins points for being sung mostly in Ukrainian. I think that that's really interesting and adds a little bit of mystery and individuality to the band. These more groove-laden and oriented moments are my favorite on the record, though. I mean, they just consistently deliver sweet fucking delicious metal. Unfortunately, they're so effective that it eventually, for me at least, becomes a detriment to the record, because when the band goes into more experimental territory, while I appreciate the band's ambition, I don't care much for the execution, and I find myself missing those moments when they were just raging out on these sweet fucking grooves. Take, for instance, the track Judgment and Punishment, which opens on a particularly furious note, but somewhere near the middle of the track loses itself in a very weirdly implemented reggae section. Individually, it's not a terrible piece of music. It is a little generic by reggae standards, but that's not really a massive issue. More importantly, in context of the song, it's just kind of jarring and feels out of place. It's not as if the song suddenly adopts this Caribbean Jamaican flavor. It just kind of does divert into people playing reggae. Like, imagine if you were listening to As the Palaces Burn and then suddenly halfway through a song, a fucking Bob Marley cover band comprised entirely of white people showed up. That's kind of how this feels for me here. Some songs adopt in some nu metal influence, but nu metal in the vein of like Soulfly and Sepultura, and it actually works pretty well alongside the band's groove metal stew. But unfortunately, even this becomes a little tainted after a bit on a track like Home Back, where the band very randomly at the 2-minute mark begins to adopt a kind of soft-spoken R&B jazz-infused melody that doesn't really work at all. Uncoincidentally, it also has maybe the weakest vocal performance from Tatiana in this one part, and just like what we heard on Judgment with the reggae flavors, it just feels unnecessary and out of place. And speaking of the clean vocals, while I love Tatiana's performance, I do think that they could just be generally implemented better across the entire record. I admire some of these creative decisions. I mean, reggae and metal, you don't really hear that coming together a lot, and while there is a lot of jazz influence within a lot of metal, you don't quite hear it being implemented this exact way. To be fair, it also does inherently make the record a little bit unpredictable, I'll give it that. But the execution just isn't really there, and it does detract from an otherwise sick concoction of fucking smart groove metal. I'm going to give this album a wildly enthusiastic 3.5 out of 5. While I'm not a fan of every single decision being made on this record, I do love that they are taking these risks. I do love that they are taking these chances. I do love that they're trying a lot of weird things and implementing sounds in different ways to create their own sound, their own unique vision, so that they don't sound like every other fucking band out there. Performances are stellar, sound mix is really great across the record, the drums in particular. There's a certain kind of raw chaos and energy to them that really does remind me specifically of some of Chris Adler's performances in the early days of Lamb of God and the way that those were captured. Even if you're like me and you're not really into the more progressive flavors and how they're implemented into Macro, you'll still enjoy the thick, hearty, and genuinely intelligent and individualistic blend of groove metal that the band has concocted here. Sure, they definitely had a lot of influence from Lamb of God, Meshuggah, and Soulfly, but they don't sound like any one of those bands. In fact, I would argue that if they continue to expand upon these more experimental ideas and if they implement them better in the future, they'll be on the verge of creating something genuinely pretty interesting and unique within the realm of mainstream metal. For now, Macro, 3.5 out of 5. I'm not loving it the way everyone else is, but it'd be pretty stupid of me to deny that there isn't some seriously good material on here, and you should definitely check it out if you're looking for something a little spicier, a little bit more unique within the realm of mainstream metal. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? Thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.